Hell is not in the Bible, not the one you're scared of. The word does not show up in the Old Hebrew, not once. The scariest idea humans ever had, the fire that has bossed around billions of people for 2,000 years, and it is just not in the oldest holy book. Somebody added it later, quietly, like a bad update nobody asked for. Here's a weirder one. The word hell in your Bible is actually 4 different words wearing a trench coat. 4 from 3 different languages. Someone squished them together into one scary word, and one of those 4 words was not even a spooky place. It was a valley, a real one, a place you could walk to. Just outside the old city of Jerusalem, there was a ditch where people used to burn garbage, and worse, burn their own children for a foreign god. That ditch is the thing your pastor was pointing at when he said the word hell. You have been losing sleep over the town dump, a real place with a real smell that you could have walked to. Let that sink in. The place that has haunted your nightmares, the place preachers have used to scare people into the pews for 2,000 years, started out as the spot where the city threw its trash and did its worst business. If you told the people who actually lived near that valley that one day the whole world would be terrified of it as the fire pit of the universe, they would have laughed at you. It was just the bad part of town. It had a smell. It had a reputation. It was not the center of cosmic justice. It was the dump. There's even an old story, which turns out to probably be made up, that the valley was a constantly burning trash fire, which is where the flames came from. Scholars looked into it and found basically no evidence for the eternal garbage fire. Somebody invented that detail too, later, to explain why hell had flames, working backward from a conclusion they already wanted, which is the whole story of hell in a tiny example. See a thing you want to be true, invent the evidence for it, and hand it down until nobody remembers you made it up. Here's one that should really get you. The fire was not always forever. In the oldest versions, the punishment lasted 3 days. 3, like a bad weekend. And then some guy, hundreds of years later, sitting at a desk, quietly changed it to forever. He turned the dial from 3 days to the rest of eternity. And he did not send anyone a memo about it. He just changed it. And it stuck, and everyone after him inherited the new number and assumed it had always been that big. That's the thing about these changes. Nobody announces them. There's no moment where a preacher stands up and says, "Hey, heads up, we upgraded the punishment to infinity last century." It just quietly becomes the new normal, and one generation later, nobody even remembers it was ever anything else. And the hell you actually picture in your head, the levels going down, the little demons, the pitchforks, the exact torture for each exact sin, none of that is from God, or Jesus, or the Bible. It's from a poem. An Italian poem from the Middle Ages. You have been terrified your whole life of a guy's creative writing project. And look, it was a good creative writing project. The poem is genuinely a masterpiece. People still study it. But that's all it was. A brilliant, spooky, made-up story. Imagine if 1,000 years from now, people were structuring their entire lives around not going to the scary place from a popular horror movie, treating it like a real location, warning their kids about it, obeying strangers to avoid it. That is more or less what happened. A story got so good that people forgot it was a story. And this happens more than you would think. Give it enough time and almost any vivid story can harden into fact in people's minds. The difference is that most stories do not have an entire institution with a lot to gain from you believing they're real. Hell did. So while other old stories faded into just stories, this one got protected, repeated, taught to children, backed by the thread of itself, and slowly promoted from fiction to the most serious fact in the universe, not because new evidence showed up, but because too many powerful people needed it to be true. And here's the one that actually matters. Every single change to hell over 1,000 years went the same way. The fire got hotter, the sentence got longer, the doors got locked. Not once did anyone make it nicer. Not once did anyone go, you know what, maybe ease off. Always worse, always scarier, always more forever. And that is a really strange thing for the truth to do. The truth usually goes both ways as we learn more. Only one kind of thing gets sharper and scarier every single year on purpose: a weapon. And a lot of this got decided the way you would decide where to put a new parking lot. In meetings, big official meetings called by emperors, where church leaders got together and argued and then voted on what everyone would now be required to believe. That is not me being cheeky, that is just what happened. Groups of men in rooms funded by the government took a vote on the nature of God and the afterlife, and then the losing side got branded heretics and pushed out. The version of hell you inherited is in part the version that won a vote, not a revelation, a show of hands. And here is proof it was never one settled truth handed down from above. Ask around today. Different churches right now believe completely different things about hell. Some say it is fire forever. Some say the wicked just stop existing. No torture, just gone. Some quietly do not believe in it at all anymore and would rather you not ask. Some believe in an in-between place you can be prayed out of. If hell were a real fixed fact that God handed down clearly, you would expect people to at least agree on what it is. They do not. They never have. 2,000 years in, and the experts still cannot agree on the basic shape of the thing, which is exactly what you would expect from something people made up in pieces, and exactly not what you would expect from something that fell from the sky finished. So somebody was building a weapon, slowly, quietly, over so many lifetimes that no single person ever had to feel like the bad guy, because each one only added a little piece, one click of the ratchet, and then died and handed it to the next. That is how almost every terrible thing in history actually gets built, not by one villain with a plan, but by a long line of normal people, each one adding a small piece, each one telling themselves they were just doing their part, just passing along what they were given, just making it a little more effective than last time. No single one of them is the monster, but line them all up across 1,000 years and you get a monster anyway, assembled out of 1,000 small, ordinary, forgivable choices. That is the scariest kind of thing there is, the kind with no villain, that hurts people for centuries, that everybody helped build and nobody meant to. And I'm going to show you who and when and why, because once you see the hands that made the fire, it gets really hard to be scared of it. So let us ask the question you're not supposed to ask: who the hell invented hell?
And hey, right now, you might feel a little tug, a little voice saying, stop, or look away, or he is wrong, before I have even shown you anything. Hold on to that tug. That tug is not an accident. Somebody put it there, on purpose, a long time ago, so you would never do the thing we are about to do. So let us do it anyway. Nothing bad happens, I promise. That is sort of the whole point. The fear only had power in the dark, in the corner, unlooked at. The second you turn and face it directly, something shifts. You will feel it happen over the next few minutes. The thing that has loomed over your whole life is about to get a lot smaller. Not because I'm going to comfort you, but because you are about to see how it was made. Let us start at the beginning, with the fact they leave out on Sunday. In the oldest part of the Bible, there is no hell. None. It's just not there. When you died, you went to a place called Sheol, and Sheol was not a fire pit. It was more like a gray basement, a quiet, boring, underground nowhere where everybody went. Good people, bad people, everybody. Same gray basement for all of them. Same nothing, same silence. Same off switch whether you were a saint or a monster. Which, when you think about it, is almost the opposite of everything you were taught. No sorting, no reward, no punishment. Just the door closing the same way for everyone. No fire, no screaming, no demons. Just dark and quiet and done. No fire, no devil with a pitchfork, no screaming. Nothing. Honestly, it sounds less like a punishment and more like a really long nap in a room of no windows. Boring, sure, but nobody's on fire, nobody's screaming. It's the afterlife equivalent of a waiting room where the magazines are old and the clock is broken. That's what the oldest holy book actually promised. Not torture, just the off switch. And when those old writers did start to hope for something more, it was not heaven and hell. It was the hope that one day God would fix the world down here and maybe wake the dead back up into it. A repair job on this life, not an escape to another one, and definitely not a torture basement for their enemies. The whole heaven up here, hell down there, sort everybody forever system simply wasn't their idea. It got bolted on later by other people for other reasons. Sit with that for a second, because it's a big deal. The book that the fear of hell is supposedly built on does not have a hell in it. The first people who wrote all this down did not think bad guys burned and good guys got a reward. They thought everybody just went to the same gray basement and stopped. So if the fire isn't in the oldest book, where did it come from? Somebody had to bring it in from somewhere. And they did. Here's the first name in the story, and it's a name nobody ever taught you in church. Persia. About 2,500 years ago, the Jewish people got conquered and hauled off to a foreign empire. And that empire eventually got taken over by the Persians. And the Persians had a religion, one of the oldest in the world, and it came fully loaded. It had a big cosmic war between a good god of light and an evil force of darkness. It had a judge for your soul after you died. It had a bridge you had to walk across, and if you had been bad, the bridge got as thin as a knife blade and you fell off it screaming into the dark. It had a heaven, and it had a hell. And I want you to hear how much of this is going to sound familiar, because that is the whole point. The Persians had a good god of light and an evil enemy who worked against him, corrupting the world, causing sickness and death and rot. Sound like anyone? They had a final battle at the end of time between good and evil. They had the dead coming back to life to be judged. They had angels carrying messages and demons causing trouble. They even had a savior figure who would come at the end to set things right. All of this written down hundreds of years before Christianity existed. So when people say these ideas are uniquely Christian, handed down brand new from God, the honest answer is that most of the furniture was already sitting in a Persian living room centuries earlier. Christianity did not invent the room, it moved into it. And the Jewish people lived under these guys for 200 years. 200. And you cannot live inside somebody else's religion for 200 years and walk away totally clean. The people who study this for a living, the serious ones, will tell you plain and simple, this is exactly when Jewish writing started to change. All of a sudden, in the newer stuff, you get things that were never there before. A judgment day, coming back from the dead, good against evil, angels, demons. None of it was in the old gray basement religion. All of it shows up after Persia. You can basically watch one religion catch the afterlife from another one like a cold. And that is not an insult, it is just how ideas work. People borrow, they always have. You borrow a recipe from a neighbor, you borrow a song you heard once. And apparently, if you live next to somebody long enough, you borrow their entire fire dimension. The problem is, nobody labeled it borrowed. They filed it under always been true, from God, do not ask questions. And a borrowed thing pretending to be original is a lot harder to argue with than a thing that admits where it came from. So the first real answer to who invented hell is not even Christian, it is not even Jewish originally. It's a Persian idea, borrowed by a conquered people who carried it home. The fire you were scared of was imported. It has a passport. Its home country is not heaven. And once you know that, a funny thing happens to all those confident sermons, because the whole power of hell came from it feeling timeless, like it had always been there, baked into the universe by God at the start. But timeless things do not have a country of origin. Timeless things do not show up in the historical record on a specific date, in a specific place, borrowed from a specific empire. Hell does. We can practically point at the century it moved in. And a fear with a move-in date is a fear you can start to see around. Now, the second piece, and this one is honestly kind of funny right up until it is not, the word. Because in your English Bible, hell shows up and it feels like one solid thing, one place. But like I said, that one word is covering up 4 totally different words, and once you pull them apart, the whole thing starts falling to bits in your hands. Word 1 was Sheol, the gray basement, everybody goes. Word 2 was Hades, which they straight up borrowed from the Greeks, the same shadowy underworld from Greek myths, also not a fire pit. Word 3 was Tartarus, a Greek jail for locked up spirits, mentioned basically once, almost like an afterthought, like whoever was writing it went, oh, and there is also this other pit. Anyway, moving on. And word 4 is the big one, Gehenna. And Gehenna was that valley I told you about, the real one, the garbage ditch outside the city where the truly awful stuff happened. So here is the funny part, and the dark part at the same time. When the guy Christians call the Son of God talked about Gehenna, he was pointing at a real place, a real ditch, that everyone listening could see from the city walls. He was using the worst spot in town as a warning, the way you might point at a burning building and go, you do not want to end up there. It was a word picture. everybody got it because they could smell the place. And then a few hundred years went by, and people who had never seen that ditch, who did not even know it was a real place on a map, took the word picture and built an entire universe out of it. They took a guy pointing at the town dump and turned it into a fire pit at the center of reality. It's a bit like if 2,000 years from now, people found an old note that said, "Meet me by the dumpster," and decided the dumpster was a holy portal and built a religion around it and started scaring their children with it. Take any real, ordinary, slightly gross place, wait long enough, lose the context, and you can turn it into the throne room of cosmic evil. That is not a miracle. That's just time, plus forgetting, plus people who benefit from you being afraid. They mixed up the finger and the thing it was pointing at. And then, more than 1,000 years later, the King James translators came along and took all 4 of these old words, the gray basement, the Greek underworld, the spirit jail, and the garbage ditch, and translated every single one of them as the same word, hell. 4 different things, 3 different languages, 1,000 years apart, all crushed into one scary word built to make you behave. When you read hell in your Bible, you are not reading one thing. You are reading a translation choice, a big pile of very different things wearing one costume. And the men who sewed that costume were not trying to trick you exactly. They were translating centuries ago, and they had a word in their own language, hell, that already meant a fiery place of punishment, because by their time, everyone already believed in that. So when they hit any of these 4 different old words, they just reached for the one scary word they already had and stamped it down 4 times. They were not inventing the fire. They were assuming it because they had inherited it, because somebody before them had built it. That's how these things launder themselves through history. Each generation just passes along what it was handed, assuming the people before them checked. Nobody checked. For 2,000 years, almost nobody checked. So, who invented hell? So far, we have a Persian import and a translation mistake. Keep going. It gets worse, and it gets closer to you. The third piece is the forever part, because even after Persia, even with the borrowed judgment and the garbage valley, hell still was not the hell you were scared of yet. Here's a detail almost nobody knows, and it is a gut punch. In the early versions, even some of the Persian ones it came from, the punishment did not last forever. It was temporary. In some of the oldest versions, the worst souls burned for 3 days. 3 days, not forever. A rough, long weekend, and then it was over. Think about how completely different that is. 3 days is a thing a person can survive in their head. It is bad, but it ends. You could count it out on your fingers. Somewhere along the line, somebody looked at a punishment you could count on your fingers and decided it needed to be a number so big it breaks your brain to think about. And they made that change quietly, with no announcement, and every single person after them just inherited the scarier version and assumed it had always been that way. The idea that you burn for all of eternity, with no end, no mercy, no exit, ever, that got added later. Somebody turned the dial. And the guy who did the most to weld that dial in place at forever was not a prophet on a mountain. He was a churchman hundreds of years after Jesus, doing theology math at a desk. And here's a twist on top of the twist. Even the word we read as forever in some of the key lines did not originally mean forever. In the old languages, it pointed to a long time, an age, a big stretch, not necessarily never-ending. It was later readers, working in a different language, centuries downstream, who hardened that word into infinity. So the forever part of hell, the single scariest thing about it, might rest on yet another word getting stretched past its real size. And notice, every time a word got stretched or a detail got added, it went the same direction. Scarier, bigger, more forever. Never once by accident did it get smaller. And that's the pattern, and it's the whole secret, so you never forget it. Think of a ratchet, that tool that only clicks one way and never back. Every single change to hell over 1,000 years was a ratchet click, one direction only. More fire,
never less, longer, never shorter, more sure, never more kind. It never once loosened. And that's not how the truth acts. The truth gets fixed in both directions as we learn stuff. Only one thing clicks one way forever and locks: a tool. A tool being sharpened over centuries by people who kept noticing that a scarier version worked better than the last one. Hell was not handed down. Hell was built up, click by click by click. And then at the very end came the guy who painted the picture you actually see. Not a priest, a poet. About 700 years ago, an Italian poet named Dante wrote a made-up tour of the afterlife. A poem, fiction, not real, not scripture, just a story out of one man's head. But it was so good, so vivid, the levels going down, the exact custom punishments, the whole map of the place, that it burned itself into everybody's brain and never left. Almost everything you picture when you think of hell comes from that poem, not the Bible. A poem. You've been scared your whole life of a piece of fan fiction that got way, way out of hand. So now you have the real answer. Who invented hell? Not God. Not one guy, one day, from the sky. It got built. A Persian afterlife borrowed by a conquered people. A garbage valley blown up into a fire pit. 4 words in 3 languages mashed into one. A punishment stretched from 3 days to forever by a churchman at a desk, and a coat of paint from a poet writing fiction. That is hell. The whole thing. Borrowed, mistranslated, exaggerated, and illustrated. Not one bit of it fell out of the sky. Every piece of it came from the ground, from people, from empires and translators and nervous churchmen, and one very talented poet. If you lined them all up, the whole crew who built the thing you have been scared of your entire life, not one of them would be God. They would be a Persian priest, a Greek myth, a translator having a rough day, a churchman doing math, and an Italian poet with a wild imagination. That is the committee that built your hell. That is who you have been afraid of. 5 guys and a bad translation. That is it. That is the whole terrifying thing that has been running your life from the shadows. A group project from a very long time ago that nobody ever graded and nobody ever checked, and everybody just believed. And if that was the end, it would just be a fun, weird history fact. But it is not the end, because here is the part that is actually about you. Nobody builds a tool this powerful by accident, and nobody keeps it running for 2,000 years for no reason. Somebody was using it. Somebody is still using it. So ask the harder question, not just who invented hell, but who did it help? And to find out who an idea helps, you ask one simple thing, not is it true? A useless idea can be true, and a useful lie can run the world for 1,000 years. The question that actually cracks it open is this: who wins when you are scared? Follow that question and the whole thing lights up like a map. Every place the fear of hell has ever been strongest is a place where someone needed a lot of people to obey without asking why. Think about what being scared of hell actually does to a person. It is the best control tool ever made, and the reason is simple. Every other threat runs out. A bully can only threaten to hurt you, and being hurt ends. A king can only kill you, and dying ends. Even the worst thing anyone can do to you here has a finish line. But hell, forever hell, is the one threat with no finish line, no exit, no end. And against a punishment with no end, no price is too high to avoid it. You will give anything, do anything, believe anything, because the other option is not just dying, which people can face, it's hurting forever with no way out. And here's what makes it work on the body, not just the mind. Fear of hell is not like fear of a spider, where you see the spider, your heart jumps, the spider leaves, you calm down. It has no off switch, because the threat is invisible and infinite and always technically possible. You can never check the box that says safe. You can never look under the bed and go, all clear. It just sits there, low and constant, humming underneath everything for your entire life. That is not a normal fear. A normal fear comes and goes. This one moves in and never leaves. Whoever holds that fear holds a power no army ever had. An army has to show up. An army costs money, needs feeding, gets tired, goes home. The fear of hell never sleeps, never eats, never goes home, and it works on people the army could never reach, in places no soldier could ever stand, like the inside of your own head at 2 a.m. It is the cheapest, most reliable, most obedient army ever assembled, and it's made entirely out of a feeling. And that is exactly why it got built the way it got built. Go back through the changes, but this time ask who wins from each one. Why did the punishment have to become forever instead of 3 days? Because a punishment that ends can be waited out, and a leash you can wait out is not much of a leash. Make it forever, and there is no waiting it out. Ever. Why did they lock the exits? Why did they call the idea that everyone eventually gets forgiven a heresy and stamp it out? Because a hell you can escape does not control you, and a hell you cannot escape does. And this actually happened to a real person with a real name. He was called Origen, and he was not some fringe crank. He was one of the most respected Christian thinkers of his whole time, a giant. And he taught that in the end, God's love would win, and every soul, even the worst ones, would eventually get brought home. A hell that heals instead of a hell that just burns. And for a while, lots of Christians believed him. But you can guess what happened. Centuries later, that gentle idea got officially condemned, called a heresy, stamped out. And a churchman named Augustine argued hard for the other version, the one where the fire is forever, no exits, no mercy. Guess which one the institution kept? Not the loving one. Every single time there was a fork in the road, a kinder hell or a crueler one, they picked crueler. You could set your watch by it. Every single change made the fear bigger and the control tighter. Bigger fire, longer sentence, fewer exits, younger victims taught earlier before they could push back. Every adjustment across 1,000 years pulling in the exact same direction, like a current under the water. If it were random, you would expect it to wobble, get gentler sometimes, harsher others, the way real mistakes and real discoveries wobble. It never wobbled. It only ever got worse, more total, more frightening, more useful to the people in charge. That is not a coincidence. That is a design. There is a woman who stayed her whole life inside something that was slowly crushing her. A marriage, a church, a life she never really picked. And every time she thought about leaving, about finally choosing herself, a cold hand grabbed her heart. The fear drilled into her since she was tiny that breaking the rules meant the fire. So she stayed, she obeyed, she gave her one and only life to it, and she called the fear that trapped her there her faith. She got controlled perfectly for 50 years by a Persian myth and a mistranslated ditch and an Italian poem. And nobody ever had to lay a finger on her. The fire did all the work, for free, from inside her own head. That is the scary part. A wall you can climb, a guard you can sneak past, but a fear living inside you goes everywhere you go. It sits in the room at 3 a.m. when nobody's watching and you could do anything, and it still says no. A jailer made out of your own imagination that you feed and obey for free for life. There is a person at a funeral right now standing over someone they loved, and instead of just grief, they're drowning in a second worse thing, terror. Because the person in the box did not believe the right things or believe them the right way, and so a voice trained into them since childhood is whispering that someone they loved is now in the fire, forever. Picture carrying that on top of your grief, not just missing someone, but being tortured by the idea that they're being tortured. That's what this does to people at the exact moment they're most broken. It can't even let them mourn in peace. And it's all built on a Persian myth and a misread ditch. That's the genius of it, if you can call something that dark genius. You don't need to hire guards if the prisoner builds his own cell and locks himself every morning. You don't need to chase anybody if they're too scared to run. The whole system runs on the prisoner's own imagination, which means it costs the people in charge exactly nothing to maintain. The scared person does all the work, forever, for free. And there is a kid,
And this is the one that should make you angry. A kid taught before he is even old enough to think straight that if he is bad, if he doubts, if he asks the wrong question, he burns forever. Picture what that does to a little brain still being built. The nightmares, being scared of your own thoughts, learning at 5 years old to shut yourself up, to flinch away from your own questions, to obey not because you love anything, but because you are terrified of a fire somebody described to you in loving detail. That is not teaching a kid right from wrong. That is installing a control chip in someone too little to say no. And it works. And it lasts, a lot of the time, for the rest of their life. That kid grows up. He gets a job, pays taxes, maybe has kids of his own, and the whole time, way down underneath, there is a 5-year-old still flinching from a fire that somebody described to him before he could even read. He might not even know it's there anymore. He just knows that certain questions make him nervous, and certain doors in his own mind he does not open, and he could not tell you why. That is the deepest kind of control there is, not a rule you're aware of and choose to follow. A flinch you don't even notice, built in so early it feels like part of your own personality. You think it's just who you are. Careful, obedient, not the type to rock the boat. But some of that careful, obedient, boat-steadying part of you might not be you at all. It might be a very old fire, still doing its job long after you forgot it was ever lit. That is the fire, still burning, quietly, decades later, in the basement of a grown man who thinks he left it behind. There's a teenager, right now, lying awake, who did the math on his own soul and could not sleep, who heard in church that people who doubt go to the fire, and then noticed with horror that he doubts. So now he's 15 and terrified, not of anything real, not of a car crash or a disease, but of a fire that a poet drew 700 years ago. He will spend years like this, years he doesn't get back, scared of a picture, and nobody around him will call it what it is, which is a child being harmed by a scary story that the adults forgot was a story. And the worst part? The people who did it to him were usually not bad people. They were his mom and dad, and they loved him, and they were scared for him, because the same thing got done to them when they were little, by people who loved them and were scared. All the way back. A chain of scared love passing the fire down, parent to kid, each one burning the next. Not out of meanness, out of terror. They really believed the fire was real, and they were trying to save him from it. And that is the saddest version of the whole thing. Not evil people cackling in the dark, just scared people doing their best, passing down a terror they never once got to examine, because examining it was the one thing they were most afraid to do. The fear protected itself by making everyone too scared to check it for 2,000 years. That is not a conspiracy of villains. It is a conspiracy of frightened love, which is somehow worse because you cannot even be angry at most of the people involved. They were burned too. And that is worth saying clearly, because this is not about mocking anyone who believes. Your grandmother, who was scared of hell, was not stupid. Your parents, who taught it to you, were not monsters. They were handed a terrifying story by people they trusted at an age when they could not question it. And they did the most human thing in the world, which is they believed the people who loved them. The problem was never the people in the pews. The problem was always the thing that was done to them and their parents, all the way back to a Persian priest and a nervous churchman and a poet with a big imagination. They were burned too. That is how the best control works. It does not need bad guys. It just needs scared people who love each other, handing the fear down forever, until somebody finally stops and looks at it and asks where it actually came from. And you want to see this thing at its ugliest? Look at what got done with it when the stakes were highest. A couple hundred years ago, when people were being held as slaves, special Bibles got printed just for them, cut up, edited. The whole story of Moses leading his people out of slavery, the big escape, deleted, gone, so they could never read it. But the parts about obeying your master, kept. And the parts about hell and damnation, kept and turned up loud. Because the fear of the fire was the cheapest chain you could buy, one that needs no metal, one the prisoner carries around inside himself. That is not an accident of history. That is the tool doing exactly the job the tool was built for. Whenever somebody has needed human beings to stay quiet, stay put, and stay obedient, against their own freedom, against every instinct screaming at them to run, the fear of hell has been right there, ready to work. Not because it's true, because it works. A whip leaves marks and makes people angry. The fear of hell leaves no marks and makes people grateful. Think about how upside down that is. If you hurt someone with your hands, they hate you and they fight back and eventually they rise up. But if you can make them afraid of an invisible fire, they will thank you for warning them about it. They will bring their children to you to be warned too. You have found a way to control people that makes them love you for controlling them. There has never been a better deal for anyone who wants power over human beings. That is why it never went away. That is why 2,000 years later, it's still here. It's the perfect tool. And that is exactly the problem. So here's the thing they never tell you. The thing underneath the whole history. The fear of hell was not put in you to make you good. If they wanted you good, they would have just taught you to be good. The fear was put in you to make you easy to control, to make you obey when obeying made no sense, to make you stay when you should have run, to make you shut up when you should have spoken, to hand over your money and your time and your one life, all because you were scared of a fire that a bunch of nervous men built brick by brick out of a borrowed myth and a bad translation on purpose, because a person who is scared of forever fire will do whatever you say. So here is where it turns. And I told you at the start there would be no cozy comfort, and there will not be. But there is something better than comfort. There is the truth, and the truth is a key, not a pillow, a key. A pillow lets you go back to sleep. A key means you are responsible now, because once you can open the door, staying in the room is a choice. And here is your key. You looked. That is the whole thing. That is the whole thing. That is all it ever took. Your whole life, the fear worked because you never turned around and looked right at it. It sat in the corner of your mind, huge and blurry and off limits, and all its power came from you not looking. And in the last 20 minutes, you looked. You saw the Persian border. You saw the garbage ditch. You saw the 4 words in one costume. You saw the dial turn from 3 days to forever. You saw the poet with his paintbrush. You stared straight at the thing you were trained never to look at, and it did not strike you down. It just turned out to be a thing some people built, with seams you can see. And a fear you can see the seams on is a fear that has already started to lose its grip, because you cannot unsee this now. Next time that old, cold dread reaches for you, next time it tries to make you obey or stay quiet or stay small, some part of you is going to remember that the fire got cooked up by scared and ambitious men over 1,000 years out of a myth they borrowed and a ditch they misread and a poem they forgot was made up. The magic trick only works until you spot the wires. You spotted the wires. You cannot unspot them. And that is a strange kind of freedom. Because it's not the warm, fuzzy kind. Nobody is telling you everything is fine. It's the cold, clear kind where you just see the thing plainly for the first time. And once you see it plainly, it cannot grab you the same way. The fear might still knock. Old habits are old habits. But now, every time it knocks, you know its name and where it came from. And a fear you can name that exactly is a fear that has already started to die. This is not me telling you what happens when you die. I said that at the start, and I mean it. Maybe there is something after, maybe there is not. That question is still wide open, and it is yours to sit with, honestly, out in the fresh air without a fire held to your feet. And there is something almost nice in that, after all the dread. Your whole life you were never allowed to actually wonder about death, because the wondering was rigged, with a giant fire on one side of the scale squashing every thought flat. Take the fake fire away, the built one, and for the first time you get to face the real mystery like a free person instead of a scared one.
What happens when we die is one of the great questions. It deserves wonder, not terror somebody manufactured to keep you in line. They stole the mystery from you and handed you a threat. You can take the mystery back. There are people who have done exactly this, who spent 30, 40 years afraid, and then one day actually looked at where the fear came from, the way you just did, and felt something they could barely describe. Not the loss they were warned about. Relief. A weight they had carried so long they forgot it was a weight, finally set down. They describe it like walking out of a low room they had been hunched in their whole life and standing up straight for the first time. The sky did not fall. God, if there is one, did not strike them down for looking. They just got to stop being afraid. And they almost all say the same thing, that they wish they had looked sooner, that they grieve the years they gave to the fear. You are looking now. That's the good news. You do not have to be one of the ones who wishes they had looked sooner. You are already ahead of where they were. You already turned around. You are already looking. So here's the last question, the only one that matters now. Your whole life, that fear has been quietly making your choices with you, sitting in the back of every big decision, keeping you smaller and quieter and more obedient than you ever needed to be. Now that you have seen exactly who built it, and when, and why, what would you do starting tomorrow if you were finally not scared of it? What would you say? Who would you stop obeying? What life would you actually start living, in the one life you can be sure is real, now that the fire has a history instead of a hold on you? Tell me in the comments, not what you believe about the afterlife. That is yours, and I am not here to take it. Just tell me one thing you would do if the fear was finally gone. One real thing. The conversation you would finally have, the question you would finally ask out loud, the place you would go, the person you would forgive, the person you would stop letting run your life, the thing you've wanted to do for years but did not, because somewhere underneath, quiet and cold, the old fire said no. Name it. Not someday, tomorrow. Because that, in the end, is the only thing that was ever really at stake here. It was never really about where you go when you die. Nobody actually knows that, and nobody selling it to you knows it either. It was always about the other thing, the thing happening right now. Who owns you while you were still alive? That is the real question. That has always been the real question. And that is exactly the question the fire was invented to stop you from ever asking. Because a person busy being scared of the next life does not have much attention left over to notice who is running this one. Keep someone staring at the floor, terrified of what's under it, and they will never look up and around and ask why their real, actual, only life looks the way it does, and who arranged it that way, and whether it had to be this way at all. The fear of hell is not just a leash, it's a blindfold, and you just took it off. Who owns you while you are still alive? Say it out loud, even just here in the comments where you cannot take it back. Because naming the thing you would do is the first small crack in the wall, and walls that have stood for 2,000 years still come down one crack at a time. I read every single one.